So unfortunately, each of the girls in our family were sexually abused before the age of 5. And my mother began working in the sex industry, and both of my younger sisters went on to work in the sex industry as well. My cousin was in the pornographic film industry in Los Angeles, and she unfortunately lost her life in 2019. When you grow up in that type of environment, whatever your primary caregivers or those around you are doing is normal to you. I was seeing upwards of 30 to 40% of my caseload have some form of mind control programming, historical sex trafficking.
Dr. Zelenko became a household name when he developed his world-famous Zelenko protocol. To make sure that everybody had access to his immune-boosting formula, he created Z-Stack, my family's immune-boosting supplement of choice. Along with Z-Detox, Z-Flu, and Z-Shield, Z-Stack has helped countless families stay healthy and protected. With every purchase of Dr. Zelenko's products, you also support the Zelenko Freedom Foundation in their tireless work to promote and reinstate medical freedom for all. Click the link down below, use coupon code INSPIRE to save, and protect your family today. Hey, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers, John Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in to another inspired conversation. You know, lately we've been talking a lot about a movie that's been out for a while now, the #1 movie in the country, I still believe, 10 million tickets plus sold, Sound of Freedom. And it has triggered a lot of conversations, a lot of discovery, which I think is great. I know there is some controversy around it, but most importantly, it is opening up a topic that hasn't really been accessible to the public at large. And so today we want to bring someone on the show that's been working behind the scenes for a very long time, has very in-depth knowledge. We met her last year, had a wonderful conversation over coffee and kept in touch. And it's just good to hear from people who have experienced aspects of it, who are now helping victims, survivors, and really have in-depth knowledge about this whole huge and truly horrific subject. So I want to introduce Amy Pfeffer to you. And she's an Elysian Oaks life coach and holds a master's in clinical mental health counseling and is recognized as a national certified counselor. Additionally, Amy holds degrees in theology, business administration, and technology. There's a lot more to say about her story, which you will do here in a moment, but which is so important. And I loved reading that on her website, is that God plays a huge role in her life and her work. So welcome with me, Amy Pfeffer. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's an honor and a pleasure, Amy. And I'm excited that we can bring some of these more wholesome conversations, not maybe as sensational and headline driven, but going really into the depths of what it means for children, women, and even boys, men in some instances, to go through this. How pervasive the problem of not just child sex trafficking somewhere in the world, but right here at home is, abuse, sexual abuse, ritualistic abuse. There's so much that plays into it. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your own personal story and how you came to work in the field you're working in today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again for having me and being willing to go down, some uncomfortable paths. I think is so helpful for people to really recognize the stories, as you say, of real people, and not in a sensational Hollywood way, but just real and raw and exactly what these people have experienced. So for me, I wasn't ever personally trafficked, but I did come from a very unstable background with all kinds of abuse, and, was in survival mode from a very young age. I lived with many different families growing up, and really was kind of on my own from the age of 13 onwards. Somehow our family, my siblings, escaped the foster system, and DCS did not remove us from our home, which still amazes me today. But I just lived with different families that would open up their homes to me. And one of the things that just struck me last week was thinking about, all the times that CPS was involved or law enforcement, and what neighbors saw something and then said something about what we were experiencing. I have no idea who these people are, but I just want to say thank you. Thank you for caring. Thank you for calling. And although that it didn't do anything, that CPS was there, there was something in my heart that just rose up last week of having empathy for those people who saw something, couldn't save us, but did something about it. But my biological mother married my father when she was 17 and he was 36. She was sexually and physically abused by her brothers and father. Came from a large family with, I believe, 10 siblings in total. And so at the age of 17, she fled just to escape her type of abuse and experience another type of abuse with my father. He was alcoholic and oftentimes rage-filled. And so she eventually left him to be with another man who had a history of physical substance and sexual abuse within his family. So unfortunately, each of the girls in our family were sexually abused before the age of 5. And my mother began working in the sex industry, and both of my younger sisters went on to work in the sex industry as well. My cousin was in the pornographic film industry in Los Angeles, and she unfortunately lost her life in 2019. At one point in time, there was a man who was nicknamed Satan living in our home. He came from the sex industry and went on to groom and rape my sister multiple times. And I had to testify against him and my mother in a court environment as a teenager. So this type of work is very personal. For me, the sex industry was my life growing up because of my mother's choices, as well as, the fact that I often lived with the strip club owner. And so it's what I grew up around. I was in constant familial and environmental distress, trauma, as I mentioned before, DCS and law enforcement interaction. All of us obviously had high scores on the ACEs questionnaire, which is the, for those of you who don't know, Adverse Childhood Events Scale. And statistically, when you come from a background like that, you're only expected to really be drug or alcohol addicted, dependent, living off the government, in jail or prison or dead, really. So when I was 17, I had an encounter with Yeshua that changed my life forever and the trajectory of my future. So really, when I look back at my childhood and I saw, it was a form of slavery. It doesn't look exactly like different types of slavery that we are taught in the history books at all. But because I did come from that environment, I think my heart is so softened towards survivors and their experiences. So about 8 years ago or so, I started working with sex trafficked survivors in the Nashville area. Just came alongside of them to be an advocate and a mentor. And I'm still in touch with some of those survivors today and have seen their growth and what they've been able to accomplish. So as I started working with them, and I started to see different variations of what trafficking can look like and the different tiers of trafficking and just how prevalent it was, in every zip code in the state of Tennessee. And I'm thinking in the state of Tennessee, I'm sure it's beyond just the state of Tennessee. And so I decided I wanted to be there for them even more. So how can I come alongside of them and offer more support from a professional standpoint? So I got my master's in clinical mental health counseling and got all my certifications and all of that good stuff. And I've been working with other types of survivors as well that come from like the satanic ritual abuse background or MK Ultra or government mind control programming and things like that. And it's been very eye-opening to say the least, but it's been amazing. It's the most rewarding work. And I have learned so much from these survivors. I'm so grateful that they're willing to be vulnerable and trust someone with their most intimate memories, the things that have wounded their hearts, and that I'm able to come alongside of them and see our intelligent designer heal them and, put them into a place of healing themselves. Once they're healed, then they can heal others. And so it's been phenomenal. And that's kind of my background and why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Which I want to say thank you for from the bottom of my heart, because I think your work is not just presently, but especially looking into the future. I think, and we're going to get into it, trauma healing, I believe, will be and already is the most important healing work that we all need as a society because there is a pattern, there is multi-generational patterns that we're going to talk about. But really, two questions, Amy. Number one is, when did you become aware that your reality and the situation you found yourself in wasn't quote unquote normal, or wasn't something that should be like that? Because so often, which is, it's a misconception that victims know, inherently know, they're oftentimes groomed, brought in, shielded from others. And so when did you realize this, and when did your healing journey begin, and how did it begin?
Yeah, so I would say I always when you grow up in that type of environment, I'll back up. When you grow up in that type of environment, whatever your primary caregivers or those around you are doing is normal to you. So what they do is they normalize trauma. And when you get out and you recognize, wait, that wasn't, I don't even know that I like the term normal, because normal's what you make it, right? It's not healthy where I came from, but trauma was normalized. So when I recognized, I stepped out of that environment, and then I was met with so much animosity, criticism, condemnation. People were saying, oh, you think you're better than us. It's your closest attachments are to these people that have normalized trauma. And so for me, I had to really cognitively help myself through that kind of solo. Obviously, the Lord was there for me, my intelligent designer, and he was kind of helping me parse through all of this. But when trauma is normalized, it's hard to argue that with the authoritative individuals that are over you. So when I stepped back and said, wait, there was a man named Satan living in my home. My sister was being groomed and raped. My mother was supplying drugs and alcohol to my friends. I was forced to testify in a court setting against my family. I lived with a strip club owner. My mother took Playboy bunny pictures of me at 4 years old and thought it would be a great idea to send that in. And she just laughed about it with her friends. My mother bought stripper clothes for my sisters for their senior pictures. My cousin died in the pornographic film industry. Like, I had to start walking myself through logic and reason and start to decouple and unweb myself from normalized trauma. Does that make sense? Kind of how I'm speaking about that? Okay.
It makes total sense, because what is often misunderstood is whatever program you're exposed to is the program you're running until you have the ability of discernment, and then you can start some kind of change journey. Before you have that ability to discern, and this is what we discuss so often also with Kathy O'Brien, a friend of yours, a mutual friend, the ability to think freely, which you can't when you're under constant stress, in constant traumatic situation. You can't think freely. And so some of the most logical choices that you could make are not available to you because you cannot think, literally cannot think them. I think that's so often because people say, well, why didn't you do this or do that? Because I wasn't even able to think those thoughts yet, right?
Right. Yeah, it's your primary attachment figures. And that could be mother, father, husband, whomever. And when you are seen as prey and they can operate in a predatorial mode, you're at a disadvantage. And so that keeps people in their programming until they're able to kind of divorce themselves from that abusive relationship.
Amy, we've talked about this. Trafficking is often in the mainstream portrayed as a certain thing. It looks a certain way. It involves certain people. Very seldom is it really close to home. And, in the movie Sound of Freedom, which I mentioned earlier, we see one aspect, and comparably small aspect of the whole spectrum of what trafficking and abuse really look like. Now, you and I live in the same area. We live in Williamson County, Tennessee, which is one of the wealthiest counties in the United States. When people think of child sex abuse, child sex trafficking, all those horrific things, they often picture huge cities. They picture poor neighborhoods. They picture maybe somewhere in foreign lands. If we look at our own county, what are we looking at in terms of just a guesstimate of numbers of how do we even quantify this, really?
Yeah, that's so difficult. I will say, just in my counseling practice, when I was in a group practice, I was seeing upwards of 30 to 40% of my caseload have some form of mind control programming, historical sex trafficking. It's a lot more than I think we know. And I'm also consulting with Kate Tolman from Revelation Gateway Ministries. And, she came from an MK Ultra style background as well. And one of the things that she indicates is just they've sent out a lot of surveys to try to assess what do these numbers look like. And she said, I think it's over 20 to 30% of the population is her guesstimate. We don't really have a way to know because it's so well hidden, even though it's in plain sight. And the individuals that are the handlers or the traffickers or the Johns or whatever, they're very well protected. So it's not something that we really have hard numbers to quantify, unfortunately. I do know that it's a lot more than what we believe. It's very prevalent.
We have at least a way when we assess certain things, when Christine and I do certain things in group settings or whatever over the years, and we assess certain situations, we probably, if we look at the numbers, I want to say upwards of 60% of the people have experienced some kind of sexual abuse, whether it was at childhood or in later years. So it is absolutely mind-boggling, unbelievable. But what are we looking at? Let's stay local. Let's stay in Tennessee, right? Mm-hmm. Are we looking? Is this more organized? Bringing in children and women from other places for your, let's say, for prostitution? Is it families trafficking their own children? What is the structure of this?
Oh, the tiers of trafficking there's so many different facets of it. Some of it is just local, and there's one survivor that I worked with that her mother sold her in diapers within just a mobile home community, right? Since she was in diapers. So that's horrific. But then there is more highly sophisticated, and we're talking in the upper echelons, we're talking entertainment, we're talking government, and then there's various things in between. There's survivors that I'm working with that have been impacted in flight communities where they've got landing pads in golf course locations, and there's trafficking that way. I mean, it doesn't look the same everywhere either. And I think that's a misconception. And some of it's just total depravity, but some of it's very highly sophisticated networks. And some of it is mind control programming. So it can look like a lot of different things.
What would be things that people could actually spot and see in their communities? Maybe they don't know what they're looking at. What is something, maybe in your experience, to look out for? What are some of the signs that you're maybe talking to a victim or that you're observing something strange?
There's so many different things. I would say if there are several people throughout different periods of the evening coming through a particular home, like traffic, in a specific location. If I know that there's like a lot of gas stations and things like that where trafficking occurs as well. If the individual doesn't have any capability to speak on their own behalf, if they use scripted responses, if they have to look at their trafficker, and of course you don't know if it's a trafficker or not, but if they have to look at another individual to speak on their behalf, a lot of medical providers and nurses actually come across trafficked survivors and children. You might see branding. There might be tattoos and different things. I know that they showed that within the Sound of Freedom movie. If there's, abortion clinics, will come across several survivors as well. There may be a form of emaciation or food deprivation. So many different things to kind of look out for. But I think the main thing is just be aware, be vigilant, not hyper vigilant, but keep your eyes out. And if you see something that doesn't look totally normal, a lot of us kind of talk it away um,
Hmm.
maybe hone in a little bit more and just keep your eyes peeled for things like that.
And you and I have also talked about this. There is a hesitance for people who dive into these subjects and who realize more and more about it. There's a hesitance to go and talk to your local law enforcement. There's a hesitance to go and talk to your local mayor because a lot of people assume that it's on some level, some people must be involved who protect this or are even involved deeper in this. And these suspicions are absolutely not unfounded. So, how do you go about it? Do you report that to the police? Do you call your sheriff? What do you do?
That's a really good question.
And it's a nuanced one. I know there's not a black and white answer, but to the best of your ability, what do you do? What would you do? What have you done in your experience, or you recommend people could do?
Yeah, sometimes I have had to call CPS, and I've had to share about sexual rituals or different things going on in specific locations. It's so difficult because CPS has a lot of reputational issues, and unfortunately, with brotherhood networks and all of that, so do law enforcement members. Sometimes you have to just do what you can in the moment, and tell someone. There are several anti-trafficking organizations that also can be contacted. And so one that I have come up with recently and just been able to speak to their team is Nashville Anti-Human Trafficking Coalition. So getting to know those different organizations in your local area would be a great way to start. Understanding how they work with survivors, what they do, how they work with law enforcement, speaking to those individuals. I've been to several galas where you're able to show up and speak with the law enforcement agents that go to the busts and are there. So, Nashville Anti-Human Trafficking Coalition are a phenomenal group of people. I would highly recommend utilizing their webpage for resources or different things like that. So I think that's really the way that I would go. And then, of course, if you see something in your neighborhood, you should call law enforcement. There should be some sort of action that you take, but I would say also be prayerful about it. If you know your sheriff, if you know some law enforcement, not everybody's bad, but I get that there's been a lot of negative press, so to speak, for some of those groups. So just if you're going to take action, know who you're calling and who can take action on their behalf.
I mean, sometimes, and this might sound cynical, but sometimes when you put something on a record and you follow up and see what happens, it shows a bigger picture. It shortly reveals itself whether there's some serious and real action taken or whether or not, and that also tells you something.
That's right.
I would also recommend, like you say, I think the only way really to get to know an organization is to work with them, volunteer, and see and look into the structure, ask questions, and that way you can see, whom you would trust and whom you wouldn't trust.
Yeah.
Amy, I want to go a little bit into the actual work that you do on a daily basis, which is working with people, healing, trauma healing. Trauma is such a misunderstood subject. And I often say that we live in a trauma-based society. All of our major societal structures are kind of traumatizing because there's so much violence involved. Even our competition-based system has gotten so out of hand. So I believe we now have a case of multi-generational trauma. So basically you already start with a disadvantage. For a lot of people it starts that way, and then oftentimes with experiences that come throughout life it only gets worse. Do you see a shift in the awareness around the subject and the importance, and B, what is your approach to trauma healing work?
Yeah, so absolutely. There's so many, even with the Sound of Freedom movie, it's bringing a lot of awareness to this topic. But for anyone having struggled with trauma of any kind, not just sexual abuse or, anything else that we've been talking about, I think that telling your story And whether that's through, I know Kathy is huge on the writing, writing out your story. Does it take time? Absolutely. But there's really a shift in that, neurochemistry, to where you're creating new neural pathways, and you're using that logic and reason part of your brain to write it out. And so it really does have an effect on retraining your brain and your amygdala in the way that you tell your story. So I think that's huge. Also, people are wounded in relationship. They're wounded in sexual abuse or any type of abuse or any type of trauma. It's also, relationship is a way to heal as well. And so learning how to build community and a support system is incredibly important. And I think a lot of people, kind of like we were talking about before, with if trauma is normalized, your first inclination is probably to choose a support system that has experienced some sort of trauma or could re-traumatize you. And so how do you start to question what your value system is and not invite additional predatorial relationship in? And so really talking through that. But I think having a space, grief demands a witness. And so I think having a space for individuals to share their story, and that's really my approach, is like, when we're in session, a lot of times I'll ask questions, and I'll initially ask them to write the answer down so that they are using that logic and reasoning part of their brain and starting to create that new neural pathway. But then they have a space to verbalize that. And many of these individuals, it's the first time they've ever shared with anyone. And to have someone believe them and then to validate, it's so healing. Does that need to be a coach or a counselor? Not necessarily. But I think as awareness grows in our communities, we have to be willing to do the hard work, if we've not experienced any of this trauma, to step in and press in with empathy and space and hold space for these survivors, so that collectively we could be much more healed as a group, and that we don't have to repeat the multi-generational trauma and continue to live through the impacts of that. I know that sounds Pollyanna and utopian, but wouldn't that be great?
No, I there's a great saying for many multi-generational things that a lot of the people that are healing are saying, and this, it stops with me. When you recognize a pattern that has been in your ancestry, right? And this is not about guilting or shaming, because none of that helps, but recognizing something has been in the pattern of my family, of my ancestors, something has been in the societal pattern. And when you recognize that and are able to heal and go through it and change it, then that stops with you and something new starts with you as well, which I think is what we're kind of in that transitioning period on Earth today. And as all this darkness comes up, the value is that we become aware and choose a new path, that we heal and choose a new path. I know you say you're intelligent designer. God, the creator, plays a huge role in that. I would go as far to saying, my experience, I haven't really seen full healing and also a real realization of the potential of life without a relationship with your creator, a real authentic relationship. How does that factor into your work and into your life?
I honestly believe that's every part to do with my work. And, I think that starts with that very first question that people ask. Okay, if I went through what I went through and I have questions about this creator, is he real? And is he good? Can he actually care for me if I've gone through this? And so once you kind of wrestle through that, and I think that's a big crux of the work, is to work with clients to get to that point to where they understand not only is he real, but he is good in spite of the evil that lives on this earth. Then it's, can I trust him with my life, the rest of my life? And once I really honestly feel like I'm just a conduit um, for these clients to their creator. Because if he's created them, and he has, and if he's knit them together perfectly and he has this beautiful design for them, he has something to say about the way they live their lives. And once I can help remove layers of shame and place their hand into their intelligent designer's hand, and they are able to walk forward in that healing, my job is really done at that point. Now, can we have maintenance sessions and keep up with each other? Absolutely. I would love to keep all of my clients, but I do know that I'm not here to retain. I'm here to watch them graduate and then to move on and to create healing in this world as well.
That's beautiful, Amy. And it's so perfectly mirrors our own experience, and the way we see the work that we do is it's just a facilitating work. We're not the source of the healing. We're just, like you say, we're maybe providing a safe space and an ability, like a little time space continuum where people can feel safe and courageous and also vulnerable enough to take that step. I think it's absolutely beautiful, and the way you approach the work and the positivity. And that is something too, because when you are on a daily basis, confronted with these stories, you have to have a source that is bigger than all of it. And I think that's what, it shows through your work. It shows through your presence, how beautiful that is. Also, I read on your website, which I love, is you're very creative with your sessions. They can happen in your office, but they can happen at the coffee shop. They can happen, you do walks and hikes.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that, because I love that approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes in office environment, I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful office, but some people just don't want to be confined to a sterile office environment. They want to get out in nature and ground. It's nice to take your shoes off and stand in some grass underneath the beautiful oak tree and pray and scream and, be kind of not in a desolate area, but in an area where there's not a lot of people. But it's outdoors in nature. And I love that. And sometimes some of my clients are very busy. I've worked with some PhDs that are just running, boom, boom, running, and they're like, meet me at this coffee shop right over here. And so, we'll just have our little session there in between, making it convenient for them in a way that they can take what we're discussing. And I'm a historical project manager as well. So I build project schedules and plans for each of my clients. And I just want to meet them where they're at in a convenient way. But I do think that there's something beautiful to being in the outdoor space.
I love that. Amy, if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to keep up with you or want to book a session with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so my website is ElysianOaksLifeCoach.com. And then I'm on all the socials under Elysian Oaks. And my email is ElysianOaks@protonmail.com if they'd like to reach me.
Wonderful. We'll put all the links in the description. Thank you so much for coming on today, for shining a light into some of the confusions and misconceptions. And also, I think, encouraging, empowering, inspiring maybe victims to say, today's the day that I'm going to take the first step. Talk to someone, schedule a call, do what I know I need to do. Thank you for that so much, Amy. I look forward to our next conversation, which is the invitation to come back on. Also share more with us a little bit about the work you do behind the scenes with survivors and what's kind of into plans, because I know, like you said, the aftercare is really where the most important work then happens. So we'd love to have you back and talk more about that as well.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be on with you today. I appreciate it.
Oh, the honor is ours, Amy, and Inspire Tribe. Thank you so much for tuning in. We love you. We appreciate you. We'll be back with you again very, very soon. Hey, John Nolan here. I'm so excited to share my new song, Faith in Me, with you. It's about the journey so many of us are on in these times. Go to johnnolan.bandcamp.com to listen or click on the link down below. Would you like to get access to exclusive content as well as being part of a community of like-minded people posting, sharing, and connecting on a deeper level? Come join the Inspired community on Locals, where we share more intimately and privately and do our coffee and truth live streams as well as our Honey Talks show, the only inspired show with Christine Nolan. The Inspired community is absolutely uncensored and unfiltered, a place for truth, authenticity, and freedom. Join us now at inspired.locals.com or click on a link in the video description.